Millionaire finds his maid in the garbage when he discovered the reason he started to cry. The gleaming glass towers of Tech Vision Industries pierced the San Francisco skyline like crystalline monuments to innovation and progress. From his penthouse office on the 50th floor, Maxwell Sterling surveyed his domain with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had built an empire from scratch. At 62, his salt-and-pepper hair and tailored suits projected an image of distinguished success, while his penetrating green eyes retained the sharp focus that had driven him to transform a small startup into a global technology powerhouse. The sun was setting over the Bay Area, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, when his executive assistant, Patricia, knocked on his door. "Mr. Sterling, the quarterly financial reports are ready for your review and the board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Maxwell nodded, his mind already racing through the impressive numbers he knew would be in those reports. TechVision's revolutionary AI-driven software platform had become the industry standard, making him one of the wealthiest men in Silicon Valley. Yet lately, a strange emptiness had been gnawing at him, an inexplicable feeling that something was missing from his life of achievement. 17 floors below, in the basement level of the same building, Elena Martinez pulled her cleaning cart through the fluorescent-lit corridor. At 32, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied her circumstances. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her uniform, though worn, was impeccably clean. As she made her way through the technical laboratories, she couldn't help but glance at the complex equipment and gleaming screens with a mixture of fascination and longing. Elena had always been drawn to technology, a passion she'd inherited from her mother, Carmen, who had once dreamed of being an engineer. But life had other plans. With 2 children at home and mounting medical bills for her mother's chronic illness, Elena's dreams of education had been replaced by the harsh reality of survival. That evening, after most employees had left the building, Elena pushed her cart toward the research and development wing. She knew she shouldn't be there. Cleaning staff were restricted to certain areas, but she had noticed something in the dumpsters behind this section. For weeks now, she had been collecting discarded electronic components to sell for extra cash. It wasn't much, but every dollar counted when you were trying to keep your family afloat. As she carefully made her way through the dimly lit space, Elena's heart raced. She had calculated the security guard's rotation perfectly. She had exactly 7 minutes before the next sweep. Just as she reached the disposal area, she heard footsteps approaching. Panic seized her chest, but there was nowhere to hide. "What are you doing here?" The commanding voice froze her in place. Elena turned slowly to find herself face to face with Maxwell Sterling himself. Her throat went dry as she struggled to form words. "Mr. Sterling, I was just cleaning." But Maxwell's eyes had already locked onto the small box of salvaged components clutched in her trembling hands. His expression hardened. "In a restricted area? With company property?" Elena's world seemed to collapse around her. She thought of her children, Tommy and Sophia, waiting at home, of her mother's expensive medications, of the mounting bills and the threatening letters from the bank. In that moment of desperation, something inside her broke. "Fire me if you must, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but gaining strength with each word. "But before you do, let me tell you why an honest woman would resort to this." Something in her tone made Maxwell pause. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity in her stance, or the familiar determination in her eyes that stirred a long-buried memory. Rather than calling security, he found himself saying, "Come to my office." As they rode the elevator in tense silence, neither could have imagined how this encounter would unravel secrets buried for decades. Elena clutched her uniform sleeve, her mother's old locket hanging heavily around her neck, the only inheritance from a woman who had once walked these same halls with dreams of changing the world. And Maxwell, stealing glances at the young woman's profile, felt an inexplicable unease, as if the carefully constructed narrative of his success was about to be challenged in ways he could never have anticipated. The elevator continued its ascent, carrying them toward a conversation that would shatter the boundaries between their worlds and force them to confront truths that had been hidden in plain sight for over 3 decades. The future of TechVision and the healing of 2 broken families hung in the balance of what would transpire in the next few minutes. The executive office of Tech Vision Industries felt like another world to Elena. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city she had only ever seen from below. The space was larger than her entire apartment, decorated with sleek furniture and contemporary art that probably cost more than she made in a year. Maxwell Sterling gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, but Elena remained standing, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Please," Maxwell said, his tone softer than before. "Sit." Elena lowered herself onto the chair's edge, her back straight, refusing to be intimidated despite her racing heart. The small box of salvaged components sat between them on the massive desk, like evidence in a trial. "Explain," Maxwell said simply, studying her with those penetrating green eyes. Elena took a deep breath. "I have 2 children, Mr. Sterling. Tommy is 12, and Sophia is 9. My mother, she's been sick for years with a chronic condition that requires expensive medication. I work 2 jobs, but with the recent rent increase and the medical bills..." She paused, swallowing hard. "I'm not a thief, sir. These were discarded components. I've been selling them to a recycling center for extra cash." Maxwell leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Why not apply for a loan? Or seek assistance programs?" A bitter laugh escaped Elena's lips before she could stop it. "With my credit score, the banks won't even look at my application. As for assistance programs, we've been on waiting lists for months. My mother was once a proud woman, Mr. Sterling. She was brilliant. She had dreams of being an engineer. Now she can barely leave her bed some days, and I can't even afford her basic needs." Something in Elena's words made Maxwell lean forward. "Your mother, she wanted to be an engineer." Elena's hand unconsciously went to the locket around her neck. "Yes. She used to tell me stories about her time as an intern at a tech company back when Silicon Valley was just beginning to boom. She had such passion for innovation, such dreams." Her voice trailed off, lost in memories. Maxwell's attention caught on the locket. It was an antique piece, oddly familiar. "That's an unusual necklace," he said carefully. "It was my mother's. Her name is Carmen Ramirez. She wore it every day when she was younger, especially during her internship days. It was a gift from someone she loved very much, someone who..." Elena stopped abruptly, realizing she was sharing too much personal information. The color drained from Maxwell's face. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Carmen Ramirez," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "From the Stanford Internship Program 1991? Now it was Elena's turn to be surprised. "Yes. How did you know that?" Maxwell stood up abruptly, walking to the window. The city lights blurred before his eyes as memories he had buried for decades came rushing back. Carmen Ramirez, brilliant, beautiful Carmen, with her infectious laugh and revolutionary ideas. They had been so young, so in love, so full of dreams, until that terrible day when she suddenly disappeared, leaving only a brief note about needing to follow her own path. He had searched for her for months, but she had vanished completely. "Your mother," he said, still facing the window, his voice thick with emotion. Is she well enough for visitors?" Elena frowned, confusion evident on her face. "Mr. Sterling, I don't understand. How do you know my mother?" Maxwell turned back to face her, and Elena was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "Because Elena, 33 years ago, I gave that locket to Carmen Ramirez. We were in love, working on what would become the foundation of Tech Vision's core technology. Then she disappeared, and I never knew why." He paused, his eyes fixed on Elena's face, seeing for the first time the familiar features that had been staring him in the face all along. Carmen's determined chin, her expressive eyes, and his own green eyes looking back at him. The realization hit them both at the same time. Elena's hand flew to her mouth as the implications became clear. The room seemed to spin around her as pieces of her mother's stories suddenly clicked into place. The mysterious love she would never discuss, the sadness in her eyes whenever Tech Vision was mentioned on the news, the timing of her departure from Silicon Valley. "That's impossible," Elena whispered, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. Her mother had never revealed who her father was, always changing the subject when Elena asked. All she knew was that he had been someone her mother loved deeply, someone connected to the tech world she had left behind. Maxwell sank back into his chair, his world tilting on its axis. "Elena," he said, his voice trembling, "I think we have a lot to talk about. And I believe it's time I paid Carmen a visit." The box of salvaged components lay forgotten on the desk, now just a small prop in a much larger drama that was unfolding. Outside the window, San Francisco continued its evening rhythm, unaware that in a penthouse office high above its streets, two lives were being irrevocably transformed by the weight of a 33-year-old secret. The small apartment in the Mission District was a world away from Tech Vision's gleaming towers. Elena's hands shook as she turned the key in the lock, Maxwell Sterling following close behind. The drive had been silent, heavy with unspoken questions and shocking revelations. Now, as they stood at the threshold of her home, Elena felt as though she was about to cross an invisible line that would forever separate her life into before and after. "Mom?" Elena called out softly as they entered. "There's someone here to see you." The living room doubled as Tommy's and Sophia's bedroom, with a pull-out couch and carefully organized school supplies on a small desk. Crayon drawings decorated the walls, bringing color to the otherwise modest space. Maxwell took in every detail, his heart constricting at the thought of his daughter, living in such conditions while he occupied a penthouse apartment overlooking the bay. Elena exchanged a glance with Maxwell before responding. "Mom, please, can you come out here? It's important." There was a shuffling sound, and then Carmen appeared in the doorway, leaning slightly on a walking cane. At 58, she retained the beauty that had captivated Maxwell all those years ago, though now her dark hair was streaked with silver and lines of pain and worry marked her face. The moment she saw Maxwell, she froze, the color draining from her features. "Max," she whispered, her free hand clutching the doorframe for support. "Hello, Carmen." Maxwell's voice was gentle, though his own emotions threatened to overwhelm him. Elena moved quickly to her mother's side, helping her to the worn armchair that was her usual spot. Carmen didn't take her eyes off Maxwell, even as she gripped her daughter's hand. "You've found out," Carmen said simply. It wasn't a question. Maxwell stepped forward, his usual commanding presence softened by the vulnerability of the moment. "Why, Carmen? Why did you never tell me?" "No," Elena said firmly, surprising both her mother and Maxwell. "I think I have a right to hear this. I've spent my entire life wondering, making up stories about who my father might be. Now he's standing right here in our living room, and I want to know the truth. All of it." "You have to understand," Carmen began. "It was a different time. We were so young, so caught up in our work, in the possibilities we were discovering, the neural network algorithm we were developing. It was revolutionary. But there were complications, things I discovered that made me question everything." Maxwell frowned. "What complications?" "Carmen, we were in love. We were building something amazing together. Then you just disappeared, leaving nothing but a vague note about following your own path. I found out I was pregnant the same week I discovered the flaws in the system," Carmen said quietly. "Flaws that could have devastating consequences if the technology was implemented as planned. When I tried to raise my concerns, I was told to keep quiet, that too much money was already invested. They said a young intern should know her place." Elena watched as Maxwell's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Who told you that?" "I never heard about any flaws in the system." "Because they never reached you," Carmen replied. "Your father's business partner, Richard Montgomery, made it very clear that if I pursued my concerns, there would be consequences. He reminded me that as an intern, I had signed away rights to any innovations I contributed to. When I insisted on speaking to you directly, he threatened to make sure I never worked in tech again." Maxwell sank onto the couch, his world tilting even further off its axis. Richard Montgomery had been like a second father to him, guiding the company through its early years. He had retired 15 years ago and passed away shortly after, taking whatever secrets he held to his grave. "So you left," Maxwell said, the pieces finally falling into place. "To protect our work and our child." Elena stood up abruptly, pacing the small room. "So instead, I grew up in poverty, watching my brilliant mother work menial jobs, hiding her knowledge and talents. How is that better? Elena, Carmen reached for her daughter, but Elena pulled away. Do you know what it's like, Elena continued, her voice rising, to see your mother's hands shake so badly she can barely hold a spoon, knowing the medication that could help her is sitting on some pharmacy shelf just out of reach? To tell your children they can't join their friends for school activities because every spare dollar goes to keeping a roof over our heads? Maxwell stood, his business instincts kicking in with the need to solve problems, to fix what was broken. I can help now. I can make all of this right. Can you? Elena turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. Can you give me back the father I never had? Can you erase the years my mother suffered in silence? Can you change the fact that I've been cleaning the buildings where I should have been working as an equal? The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy with decades of loss and regret. Through the thin walls, they could hear the sounds of neighbors living their lives. Children laughing, a television playing, the ordinary soundtrack of an existence so different from the one Elena might have had. No, Maxwell said quietly. I can't change the past, but I can change the future, starting right now. He looked at Carmen, then back at Elena. If you'll let me. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall, counting out the seconds as 3 lives hung in the balance, waiting to see if bridges burned by time and circumstance could possibly be rebuilt. The following week at Tech Vision Industries felt surreal to Elena. She still wore her cleaning uniform, still pushed her cart through the corridors, but everything had changed. Every employee she passed, every executive who barely glanced her way, now represented a life she might have had, a life that had been stolen from her by circumstances and secrets. Maxwell had insisted on helping immediately, offering to move them to a better apartment, to pay for Carmen's medical treatment, to set up trust funds for Tommy and Sophia. Elena had refused it all, much to his frustration. I need time, she had told him firmly. We can't just pretend the last 32 years didn't happen. Now, as she cleaned the executive floor bathrooms, she heard familiar voices approaching. Through the partially open door, she could make out Maxwell's voice and that of Victoria Hawthorne, Tech Vision's chief operating officer. Maxwell, the board is concerned about your recent distraction, Victoria was saying. The Chen merger requires your full attention, and you've been mysteriously unavailable. And what's this about requesting a complete audit of our historical patents and innovation credits? Elena's hands stilled on the sink she was wiping. She listened intently as Maxwell replied, his voice carrying that authoritative tone she was beginning to recognize as inherited. Victoria, I've run this company for 3 decades. I think I've earned the right to investigate its foundations without questioning. The Chen merger will proceed as planned. And the rumors about you spending time in the Mission District. Maxwell, you have to understand how this looks. Your behavior lately has been erratic. There was a pause, and Elena could picture Maxwell's expression, the same one she had seen in the mirror all her life when facing opposition. My personal time is my own, Victoria. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lunch appointment. Elena quickly resumed cleaning as footsteps moved away. She checked her watch. It was nearly noon. The lunch appointment Maxwell mentioned was with Tommy and Sophia. He had been persistent about meeting his grandchildren, and Elena had finally agreed, choosing a casual diner near their school. An hour later, Elena sat in a worn vinyl booth, watching as her children sized up the impeccably dressed man before them. Tommy, already showing signs of Carmen's analytical mind, was particularly skeptical. So you're like a billionaire? He asked bluntly, taking a bite of his burger. Tommy, Elena admonished, but Maxwell raised a hand. It's a fair question, he said, then addressed Tommy directly. I've been very fortunate in business, yes. But I'm learning that success can be measured in many ways. Sophia, who had been quietly drawing on her paper placemat, looked up. Is that why Mama still has to clean even though you're rich? The innocent question landed like a punch to Maxwell's gut. He looked at Elena, who was stirring her coffee with intense concentration. Your mother, Maxwell said carefully, is one of the strongest and most principled people I've ever met. She's teaching me a lot about what really matters in life. But you could help us, right? Tommy pressed. You could help Abuela get better medicine? Maybe we could have our own rooms instead of sleeping in the living room." "That's enough," Elena cut in sharply. "Mr. Sterling, Dad, whatever we're calling him. He's here to get to know you, not to be a walking ATM." Maxwell noted her slip with the word Dad, though she had quickly covered it. It was the first time she had referred to him as anything other than Mr. Sterling. "Actually," he said, pulling out his tablet, "I wanted to show you all something. I've been doing some research into the early days of tech vision, and I found these." He pulled up a series of old photographs. There was Carmen, young and radiant, working at a computer terminal. Another showed her presenting at what appeared to be an internal meeting, her hands gesturing animatedly as she explained something to a room full of attentive listeners. "Your grandmother was brilliant," Maxwell told the children. "She could see possibilities that others missed. She understood technology not just as a tool, but as a way to make the world better." Eleanor felt her throat tighten as she watched her children lean in, absorbing these images of a grandmother they had only known as a sick woman confined mostly to her bed. "Is that why you're looking into the old patents?" Elena asked quietly. Maxwell's eyes snapped to her face. "You heard that conversation. I hear a lot of things when I'm cleaning. People tend to forget I'm there." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, broken only by the clinking of dishes and the general buzz of the diner. Finally, Maxwell spoke. "I'm establishing a new division at Tech Vision," he announced. "A think tank focused on ethical innovation and inclusive technology development. I want you to run it, Elena." The French fry Sophia had been about to eat fell from her hand. Tommy's eyes went wide. Elena felt as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. "I'm a cleaning lady," she said flatly. "I don't have a degree. I haven't even taken a business class." "You have your mother's mind," Maxwell countered. "I've seen your personnel file. Perfect attendance, innovative suggestions for improving cleaning efficiency that saved the company thousands. You see systems and how to make them better, just like Carmen did. And how exactly would you explain this to your board? To Victoria Hawthorne? Oh, by the way, I'm promoting the cleaning lady to an executive position because she happens to be my secret daughter." "I'm not ashamed of who you are," Maxwell said firmly. "And it's time Tech Vision remembered its roots. That innovation doesn't just come from prestigious degrees and corner offices." Eleanor looked at her children, who were watching the exchange with rapt attention. She thought of her mother, who had sacrificed her dreams to protect the truth. She thought of all the other hidden geniuses, pushing mops and cleaning toilets while their minds brimmed with unrealized potential. "If, and this is a big if, I consider this," Elena said slowly. "It needs to be more than just a gesture. It needs to mean real change." Maxwell nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Tell me what you're thinking." And there, in a modest diner on the edge of Silicon Valley, surrounded by the smell of coffee and grilled onions, Elena began to outline a vision that would shake Tech Vision to its very foundations. The executive floor of Tech Vision buzzed with barely contained chaos. Elena stood before the mirror in her new office bathroom, adjusting the blazer she'd purchased from a consignment shop. The designer label was second-hand, but the determination in her eyes was all her own. Her first executive meeting was in 15 minutes, and the whispers had already begun. "Did you hear?" She'd overheard one manager say to another in the elevator. "Sterling's lost his mind. He's promoting a janitor to head a whole division." A janitor. Elena squared her shoulders, remembering her mother's words from that morning. Carmen had been having a good day, the new medications finally beginning to work, her hands steady enough to help Elena style her hair. "Show them what a Ramirez woman can do, mi hija," Carmen had said, her eyes fierce with pride. "Make them see what they've been overlooking all these years." The conference room was already full when Elena arrived. Victoria Hawthorne sat at Maxwell's right hand, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp as razors. The other executives, all men in expensive suits, barely concealed their skepticism. Maxwell stood as Elena entered. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Elena Martinez, the new Director of Ethical Innovation and Community Development." "Fascinating title," Victoria said smoothly. "And what exactly qualifies Ms. Martinez for this unique position?" Before Maxwell could speak, Elena stepped forward. 20 years of observing how this company really works, Ms. Hawthorne. From the ground up, she opened her laptop, connecting it to the presentation screen. And I believe I have some insights you might find interesting. The screen filled with a series of graphs and efficiency analyses. These are waste patterns I've documented across departments over the past 5 years. See these spikes? They correlate directly with project deadlines and resource allocation. But here's where it gets interesting. She clicked to the next slide, showing a complex network of interconnected data points. I've mapped out how information actually flows through this company, not just through official channels, but through every level. The cleaning staff, the security guards, the maintenance workers. We see everything, hear everything. And what we see is a company wasting millions in redundant processes while overlooking innovative solutions from its most overlooked employees. The room had gone completely silent. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails drummed once on the table before going still. "And how did you compile this data?" one of the executives asked, leaning forward despite himself. "The same way I put myself through night classes in data analysis while working 2 jobs, Elena replied, "by paying attention, taking notes, and understanding systems." Maxwell watched with barely concealed pride as Elena commanded the room's attention. But it was what came next that truly shifted the atmosphere. "I've also been reviewing our company's historical archives," Elena continued, pulling up another screen. "Particularly interesting are these patent applications from 1991. The core algorithm that built this company, it bears remarkable similarities to theoretical work documented in intern project logs from that period. Logs that were supposedly lost in a server migration." Victoria's face went pale. Some of the older executives exchanged worried glances. "That's ancient history," Victoria cut in. "Surely we should be focusing on current projects, like the Chen merger." "The past matters," Elena said firmly, "because it shapes our future. And right now, TechVision has a choice to make. We can continue operating as we have been, letting brilliant minds slip through the cracks, or we can revolutionize how we approach innovation and talent." She clicked to her final slide, revealing a comprehensive proposal for a new company initiative, the Hidden Genius Project. A program to identify and develop talent from every level of our organization, combined with a community outreach program targeting underserved neighborhoods. Because the next big breakthrough in tech might not come from Stanford or MIT. It might come from someone pushing a mop, or serving coffee, or raising kids while taking online classes. The room erupted in overlapping voices. Maxwell raised his hand for silence, but it was Victoria who spoke first. "This is all very inspiring," she said, her voice dripping with controlled disdain. "But the board requires more than just feel-good initiatives. We need concrete results, measurable outcomes. Which is why I've already implemented a pilot program," Elena replied, refusing to be intimidated. "In the 3 days since I started this position, I've interviewed 15 maintenance and custodial staff members. 3 have advanced degrees from their home countries that weren't recognized here. 2 are self-taught programmers who've developed efficiency apps for their departments. And 1 has a prototype for an AI-driven waste reduction system that could save this company 30% in operational costs." She paused, letting that sink in. "Imagine what we'll find when we start really looking." Maxwell cleared his throat. "I've reviewed Elena's proposal in detail. The board has already approved a preliminary budget. This isn't up for debate. This is happening." Victoria gathered her papers, her movements precise and controlled. "Well, it seems decisions have already been made. Though I do wonder about the timing of all this and your personal interest in Ms. Martinez's sudden rise." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Elena felt her chest tighten, but before she could respond, another executive spoke up. "Actually," said James Chen, head of R&D, "I'd like to hear more about this waste reduction prototype and the other innovations you mentioned. Perhaps we've been looking for breakthroughs in all the wrong places." As the meeting shifted into detailed discussions, Elena caught Maxwell's eye across the table. In that moment of shared understanding, father and daughter recognized in each other the same unstoppable force, the determination to right past wrongs and build something new from the ashes of long-buried truths. But in Victoria's rigid posture and calculating gaze, Elena saw the storm clouds gathering. The real battle was just beginning. Late into the evening, Elena sat cross-legged on the floor of TechVision's records room, surrounded by boxes of old documents. Her blazer was draped over a nearby chair, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. The room smelled of dust and forgotten memories. "You know," Maxwell said from the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee, "we do have a digitized archive system." Elena accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. Some things don't make it to the digital archives, like these. She held up a stack of handwritten lab notebooks, Mom's original research journals. They were misfiled under maintenance records. Maxwell settled onto the floor beside her, his expensive suit gathering dust. Over the past weeks, Elena had noticed him gradually shedding his corporate armor around her. Now, as they sat among the physical remnants of the past, he looked more like the young innovator in the old photos than the tech tycoon who dominated boardrooms. "Your mother was always meticulous in her documentation," he said, gently taking one of the notebooks. "She used to say that innovation without documentation was just daydreaming." "Listen to this," Elena said, reading from another journal. "Potential ethical concerns regarding neural network application in decision-making processes. System shows unconscious bias replication when—" She stopped abruptly, frowning at the page. "The rest is torn out." Maxwell leaned over to look. "That's from the week before she disappeared." "Elena, what exactly are you looking for in these records?" "The truth," she replied simply. "Mom said she discovered flaws in the system, flaws that Richard Montgomery wanted to hide. But what if it was more than that? What if—" A sound at the door made them both look up. Victoria Hawthorne stood there, her silhouette sharp against the hallway lights. "Working late?" Her tone was pleasant, but her eyes were cold as she surveyed the scene. "How dedicated of you both. Though I must say, Maxwell, these little father-daughter bonding sessions are raising questions among the board members." Elena felt Maxwell tense beside her, but she spoke first. "We're reviewing the company's historical innovation records, Ms. Hawthorne. I believe you were junior legal counsel here in 1991. Perhaps you could help us understand why certain research records seem to be incomplete." Victoria's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment. "Ancient history is rarely complete, Ms. Martinez. Companies evolve, records are lost, people move on." She stepped into the room, her heels clicking on the tile floor. "Though I must admit, I'm curious about your sudden interest in decades-old paperwork." "Just trying to understand the company's roots," Elena said carefully. "After all, TechVision's core technology came from this era." "Did it?" Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "How interesting that a former janitor has developed such specific historical interests. Almost as interesting as her miraculous promotion to executive status. The board is quite concerned about the appearance of impropriety." Maxwell stood, his voice carrying a warning edge. "The board approved Elena's position and her initiatives. The board can also disapprove them," Victoria countered smoothly, "especially if they were to learn about certain personal complications that might cloud your judgment, Maxwell." The threat hung in the air like static before a storm. Elena rose slowly, gathering the journals. "You know what I find interesting, Ms. Hawthorne?" she said, her voice steady. "How someone who was just starting in legal at the time seems so invested in keeping these old records buried." Victoria's smile never wavered, but her eyes hardened. "Careful, Ms. Martinez. Insinuations can be dangerous things, especially for someone with your background. It would be a shame if the press got wind of your rather unorthodox rise to power, or your mother's history with the company." "Are you threatening my daughter, Victoria?" Maxwell's voice was quiet, but carried an authority that filled the room. "Threatening? Not at all. Just expressing concern about the company's reputation. After all, we wouldn't want anyone thinking that TechVision's legendary founder had lost his edge, promoting unqualified individuals based on personal attachments." Elena stepped forward, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "You know what I learned from years of cleaning corporate offices, Ms. Hawthorne? The biggest messes aren't the ones you can see. They're the ones hidden in filed-away papers and forgotten records." She held up one of Carmen's journals. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to do the dirty work of digging them up. Victoria's composure cracked just slightly. You're playing a dangerous game, little girl. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Actually, Elena replied, I think for the first time, I'm beginning to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. She turned to Maxwell. Dad, remember how Mom said Richard Montgomery threatened her about the system's flaws? I don't think he was acting alone. Understanding dawned in Maxwell's eyes as he looked between Eleanor and Victoria, the younger woman who had risen so quickly through legal ranks after Carmen's departure, the one who had worked closely with Montgomery in those crucial early years. Victoria straightened her jacket. Well, this has been fascinating, but I have a meeting to prepare for. The Chen merger review is tomorrow, and the board will be expecting a full analysis of our current situation. She moved to the door, then paused. Oh, and Elena, do give your mother my regards. Such a shame about her health issues. Hospital bills can be so overwhelming these days. After she left, Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Maxwell put a hand on her shoulder. Are you okay? Elena nodded, then held up the journal she'd been protecting. More than okay. Because while she was busy threatening us, I found what Mom was looking for. She opened to a page filled with complex diagrams and calculations. This is it, Dad. The original code architecture. And look who signed off on the review. Maxwell leaned in, his eyes widening as he read the names scrawled at the bottom of the page. Victoria Hawthorne may have been just starting in legal, Elena said grimly. But according to this, she was already making executive decisions. Decisions that changed the course of this company and our lives. Outside the records room, the modern offices of Tech Vision hummed with activity, unaware that in this dusty corner of the past, the foundations of their future were beginning to crack. The first meeting of Elena's Hidden Genius project drew a crowd that exceeded all expectations. The Tech Vision cafeteria, usually empty at 7 a.m., was packed with maintenance workers, security guards, cafeteria staff, and cleaning crews, all the invisible workforce that kept the corporate giant running. Elena stood at the podium, her mother's journal tucked safely in her briefcase, trying to focus on the present moment, despite the weight of their recent discoveries. She had spent the weekend poring over the documents they'd found, each page revealing more about the tangled web of decisions that had shaped her family's destiny. Welcome, everyone, she began, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. I see a lot of familiar faces, people I've worked alongside for years, people whose talents and dreams have gone unnoticed for far too long. In the back of the room, she spotted Tommy and Sophia sitting with Carmen, who had insisted on attending despite her health. Maxwell stood near them, looking somewhat out of place in his usual tailored suit. But his presence sent a clear message about the company's commitment to change. Today, Elena continued, we're launching something revolutionary. Not just a training program or a diversity initiative, but a complete reimagining of how innovation happens. Because true innovation doesn't care about degrees or job titles. It comes from understanding real problems and having the courage to solve them. She clicked to her first slide, showing the success stories they'd already uncovered. Meet Jorge Mendez from our maintenance team. He's developed an AI-driven system for predicting equipment failures that's already saving us thousands in repair costs. And Sarah Chen from the cafeteria staff, whose food waste reduction algorithm is being implemented company-wide. The room buzzed with excitement as Elena outlined the program's components, mentorship opportunities, educational support, resource access, and most importantly, a clear path to advancement based on merit rather than background. As she spoke, she noticed Victoria Hawthorne slip into the room, accompanied by 2 board members. Their presence sent a ripple of tension through the crowd. Ms. Martinez, Victoria called out during the Q&A session, her voice carrying that familiar edge of controlled disdain. This all sounds very inspiring, but could you address the concerns about diluting our professional standards? After all, Tech Vision's reputation was built on excellence. Elena felt all eyes turn to her. In that moment, she thought of the documents they'd discovered, of Victoria's role in burying her mother's innovations. But instead of anger, she felt a sudden clarity. Excellence, Ms. Hawthorne, is not a privilege of education or position. It's the result of passion, dedication, and opportunity. She gestured to the crowd. Every person in this room has demonstrated excellence in their own way. They've solved problems, improved systems, and kept this company running smoothly, often without recognition or reward. She clicked to her next slide, showing the company's earliest patents. Tech Vision was indeed built on excellence. The excellence of young innovators who dared to think differently, who saw possibilities others missed. Her eyes met Victoria's. All of them, even the ones whose names were left off the patents. Victoria's smile froze. One of the board members leaned forward with interest. In fact, Elena continued, I've been researching our company's early development period. It's fascinating how many breakthrough ideas came from our intern and junior staff programs back then, programs that were unfortunately discontinued under certain management recommendations. The board members were now openly staring at Victoria, whose composure showed the slightest crack. Elena pressed on, building momentum. That's why this initiative isn't just about finding hidden talent. It's about acknowledging and learning from our past, about ensuring that no brilliant idea is ever again dismissed because of who suggested it. From the crowd, hands shot up with questions, ideas, and suggestions. The energy in the room was electric. Elena caught snippets of excited conversations in multiple languages as people began networking, sharing their hidden projects and dreams. After the presentation, as the crowd mingled over coffee and pastries, James Chen from R&D approached Elena. Remarkable presentation, he said quietly, though I couldn't help but notice the historical references. You're playing a dangerous game, Elena. I'm not playing any game, she replied. I'm fixing what's broken, both in the present and the past. James glanced toward Victoria, who was engaged in intense conversation with the board members. You should know. There's an emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Victoria's been making calls all weekend. Elena nodded, unsurprised. Let her make her moves. The truth has a way of surfacing, Mr. Chen. Sometimes it just needs a little help from the cleaning crew. Later that afternoon, Elena sat in her office, reviewing applications for the program when Maxwell entered, closing the door behind him. That was quite a presentation, he said, pride evident in his voice. Though I suspect it wasn't just about the initiative. Elena looked up from her papers. Every word I said was true. This company needs to change. But you're right. It's not just about the future. She pulled out Carmen's journal. Mom wasn't the only one whose innovations were buried. I've found at least 3 other cases from that period. All women, all from diverse backgrounds, all silenced or pushed out after raising concerns about the technology's applications. Maxwell sank into a chair, the weight of these revelations visible in his expression. Victoria was more than just Montgomery's legal counsel, wasn't she? She was his protégé, Elena confirmed. And I think she helped design the system that kept people like Mom from being heard. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Before Maxwell could respond, Elena's computer chimed with an urgent email. Her face went pale as she read it. What is it? Maxwell asked, alarmed. Victoria's called for a full audit of the Hidden Genius project. And Elena swallowed hard. She's demanding a review of my appointment, citing concerns about improper influence and potential corporate espionage. Maxwell stood, his expression hardening. She's overplaying her hand. No, Elena said, a determined smile forming on her face. She's doing exactly what we needed her to do. Because now we have cause to do our own audit of everything. The setting sun cast long shadows through the office windows, painting the scene in shades of gold and shadow. A fitting backdrop for the battle lines being drawn in silicon and secrets. The Tech Vision boardroom felt like a courtroom on the morning of the emergency meeting. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the tense faces of board members seated around the massive mahogany table. Elena sat straight-backed in her chair, Carmen's journal, and a stack of carefully prepared documents in front of her. Maxwell sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Victoria Hawthorne stood at the front of the room, her presentation displayed on the large screen behind her. Members of the board, I've called this emergency session out of deep concern for the future of Tech Vision. Recent decisions have raised serious questions about our corporate governance and the protection of our intellectual property. She clicked to a slide, showing Elena's rapid rise from custodial staff to executive position. While we all appreciate inspiring stories of advancement, we must consider the unprecedented nature of Ms. Martinez's promotion and the potential risks it poses to our company. Risks? James Chen interrupted. The Hidden Genius Project has already identified valuable innovations that were being overlooked. How is that a risk? Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. The risk, Mr. Chen, lies in the methods being employed. We have evidence that Ms. Martinez has been accessing restricted historical records, conducting unauthorized investigations into proprietary technology, and using her personal connection to Mr. Sterling to circumvent proper corporate procedures. Elena felt all eyes turn to her. This was the moment Victoria had been building toward. The public exposure of her relationship with Maxwell meant to discredit them both. But Elena had been preparing for this. Ms. Hawthorne, Elena said, rising from her seat, would these be the same restricted records that document the original development of TechVision's core technology? The ones that were supposed to be lost in a server migration? She opened her laptop, connecting it to the display. The screen filled with scanned pages from Carmen's journal, alongside official patent documents from 1991. Members of the board, while Ms. Hawthorne is concerned about my methods, I'm more concerned about the methods used 33 years ago to suppress innovation and silence voices that raised ethical concerns about our technology. Victoria's composure slipped slightly. These are ancient matters, irrelevant to... They're extremely relevant, Elena cut in, her voice firm. Because the same system that buried my mother's contributions is still in place today, still deciding whose ideas matter and whose don't. She clicked through a series of documents, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. Carmen Ramirez wasn't the only innovator whose work was appropriated. Maria Santos, Priya Patel, James Wong, all interns or junior staff who raised concerns about ethical implications of the technology. All mysteriously departed the company after documenting their concerns. The board members leaned forward, studying the evidence with growing concern. Victoria moved to speak, but Elena pressed on. And in each case, there was a legal counsel who handled their departure agreements. A young lawyer named Victoria Hawthorne, working closely with Richard Montgomery to ensure these innovations were absorbed into company patents while their creators were quietly removed. This is absurd, Victoria snapped. You can't possibly verify any of these ancient accusations. And your obvious personal bias. Actually, James Chen spoke up, we can verify them. He produced a thick folder. After Elena's presentation yesterday, I had my team review all patent applications from that period. The algorithmic signatures in the original code match perfectly with the documentation in Ms. Ramirez's journals. Work that was later attributed to others. Victoria's face had gone pale. Maxwell, she said, turning to him, surely you can't allow this witch hunt to continue. Think of the company's reputation. Maxwell stood slowly. I am thinking of the company's reputation, Victoria, and its future. He addressed the board directly. For years we've prided ourselves on being innovators, on pushing boundaries. But we built that success on buried truths and silenced voices. Elena's project isn't just about finding new talent. It's about correcting course. You're all being manipulated, Victoria said, her voice rising. This woman appears out of nowhere, claims to be Sterling's daughter, and suddenly we're rewriting company history. This is nothing but a calculated attempt to... To what, Ms. Hawthorne? Elena interrupted quietly. To expose the truth? To ensure that no other brilliant mind is silenced because they dared to question the ethics of our technology. She pulled out one final document. Or perhaps to understand why a junior lawyer would work so hard to help bury innovations that could have made our technology more ethical, more inclusive, and more responsible. The room fell silent as Elena projected the last piece of evidence, a memo from 1991, detailing profit projections for the original algorithm. At the bottom was a note in Richard Montgomery's handwriting. VH's modifications to the legal framework ensure maximum profitability. Additional compensation approved. You were more than Montgomery's protégé, Elena said softly. You were his partner in ensuring that profit would always trump ethics. That voices like my mother's would never be heard. Victoria's professional mask finally cracked. You have no idea what it took to build this company, she hissed. The sacrifices required. The hard decisions. We were creating the future. No, Elena replied. You were stealing it. From my mother, from those other innovators, from every employee whose ideas were dismissed because they didn't fit your narrow vision of who could contribute. The board chairman cleared his throat. Ms. Hawthorne, in light of these revelations, I believe we need to conduct a full investigation into these historical matters, and perhaps it would be best if you took a leave of absence during this process. Victoria looked around the room, finding no allies among the shocked faces of the board members. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling, and everyone could see it. This isn't over, she said, gathering her things with trembling hands. You're right, Elena agreed. It's just beginning. Because now we're going to do what should have been done 33 years ago. We're going to listen to every voice, consider every idea, and build a future that includes everyone. As Victoria stormed out of the boardroom, Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders. But she knew this was just the first step in a longer journey of transformation, for herself, for TechVision, and for all the hidden geniuses still waiting to be discovered. Maxwell caught her eye across the table, his pride evident in his smile. In that moment, Elena saw not just her father, but a partner in rebuilding something better from the ashes of the past. The weeks following Victoria's dramatic exit from TechVision brought a whirlwind of changes. Eleanor's office, once a symbol of her sudden rise to power, had become the heart of a transformation that was reshaping the company from the inside out. The walls were covered with flowcharts and project proposals, while a steady stream of employees from all levels of the company came and went with ideas and updates. On this particular morning, Elena sat across from Sarah Chen, the former cafeteria worker whose food waste algorithm had caught everyone's attention. The pilot program in the downtown branches has reduced waste by 42%, Sarah reported, her confidence growing with each word. And we've modified the system to share surplus food with local shelters. Elena smiled, remembering her own early days of collecting scrap metal to make ends meet. Excellent work, Sarah. I want you to present these findings at next week's executive meeting. Sarah's eyes widened. Me? But neither had I, until recently, Elena reminded her. It's time for new voices to be heard in those rooms. After Sarah left, Elena checked her phone to find a message from Maxwell. Meeting in the archives room. Found something you need to see. The archives room had been transformed in recent weeks. Gone were the dusty boxes and chaotic filing systems. Instead, a team of researchers, including several former maintenance workers with advanced degrees in library science, had created a digital catalog of every document, making the company's true history accessible for the first time. She found Maxwell surrounded by old photographs and technical drawings. His tie was loosened, and his sleeves were rolled up, a look that had become more common as he embraced his role in the company's reformation. Look at this, he said without preamble, holding up a yellow document. It's the original team roster from the Neural Network project. Carmen wasn't just any intern. She was the team leader. Elena took the paper, studying the names. There are dozens of people here who never got credit for their work. And that's not all. Maxwell spread out several technical diagrams. These drawings show modifications to the original algorithm, modifications that made it more ethical, more responsive to human needs. All of this was stripped away when Montgomery and Victoria pushed for faster deployment. Elena sank into a chair, the weight of these discoveries settling over her. They didn't just steal the credit, they fundamentally altered the technology's purpose. Which explains why Mom was so desperate to stop them, a new voice added. They turned to find Tommy standing in the doorway, his school backpack still slung over his shoulder. Tommy, what are you doing here? Elena asked, surprised to see her son at the office. Half day at school, he explained, moving to examine the diagrams. And I wanted to show you something. From his backpack, he pulled out a laptop held together with duct tape, a recent purchase from a thrift store. I've been studying Abuela's old journals, the ones you brought home. And I think I figured out how to implement some of her original ideas using modern coding frameworks. Maxwell and Elena exchanged amazed looks as Tommy pulled up his work. At 12, he showed the same intuitive understanding of technology that had driven Carmen's innovations decades ago. The ethical constraints she designed, Tommy explained, pointing to his screen, they're like guardrails for AI decision-making. But instead of limiting the system's power, they actually make it smarter, more adaptable to human needs. Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her son explain concepts that her mother had fought to protect all those years ago. The legacy hadn't been lost. It had just skipped a generation. A knock at the door interrupted them. James Chen entered, looking apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you both need to know. Victoria's been talking to the press." Elena straightened. "What kind of story is she spinning?" "That's just it," James said, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "She's not spinning anything. She's confessing. The whole story. The buried innovations, the ethical concerns, all of it. Says she's tired of carrying the weight of those decisions." Maxwell let out a long breath. "After all these years, there's more," James continued. "Some of the other former interns have come forward, wanting to share their stories. The press is calling it the hidden history of Silicon Valley." Elena looked at the document spread before them, then at her son's computer screen, showing his implementation of Carmen's original vision. "Maybe it's time we shared our story too. All of it." "What do you mean?" Maxwell asked. "A press conference," Elena said, ideas forming rapidly. "But not just about the past. We'll announce the expansion of the Hidden Genius Project, showcase the innovations we've already uncovered, and unveil our plans for ethical technology development." Tommy's eyes lit up. "Can I present Abuela's algorithm? Show how it could work today?" Elena exchanged a look with Maxwell, who nodded encouragingly. "I think that would be perfect. A bridge between the past and future." As they began planning the announcement, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Sofia. "Abuela's having a good day. She's been writing something all morning. Says it's important." Elena showed the message to Maxwell, whose expression softened. "Carmen always did have perfect timing," he said quietly. Looking around the room at the scattered evidence of both past injustice and future possibility, Elena felt a profound sense of rightness. The company's transformation wasn't just about correcting old wrongs. It was about building something entirely new, something that honored all the voices that had been silenced while creating space for new ones to emerge. "Dad," she said, testing the word that still felt new on her tongue, "I think it's time we brought Mom back to Tech Vision. Not just her ideas, but her presence. She should see what her courage started." Maxwell nodded, emotion clear in his eyes. "Yes, she should." And Elena. He picked up one of the old photographs, showing Carmen presenting her research. "Thank you for cleaning up the mess we left behind. All of it." The late afternoon sun streamed through the archives room windows, illuminating the scattered papers and eager faces. In that moment, they were more than executives and employees, more than even father and daughter. They were architects of a new future, one built on the foundation of long-buried truths and the promise of voices yet to be heard. "I've been waiting for the right moment," Carmen said, her voice stronger than usual. "When Victoria's story broke on the news this morning, I knew it was time." She looked at Maxwell, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Time for the whole truth to come out." Elena reached for her mother's hand. "What truth, Mom?" Maxwell leaned forward, his face etched with concern. "Carmen, what are you saying?" "Read it," she said softly. "All of you. Together." Elena picked up the notebook, her hands trembling slightly as she opened to the first page. Her voice was clear and steady as she began to read. "To those who will shape the future, I write this not as an accusation, but as a restoration of truth. In the summer of 1991, while working as the lead intern on TechVision's neural network project, I made a discovery that would haunt me for the next 33 years. Our team, a group of brilliant young minds from diverse backgrounds, hadn't just created a revolutionary algorithm. We had discovered something fundamental about how artificial intelligence could be developed in harmony with human values. The ethical framework we designed wasn't a constraint on the system's capabilities. It was the key to its true potential. But more than that, we had created a collaborative model that brought together perspectives from across cultural, social, and economic boundaries. Our team included janitors, who offered insights about real-world applications, cafeteria workers, who helped us understand human interaction patterns, and maintenance staff who spotted technical inefficiencies we had overlooked. The breakthrough wasn't just technological, it was human. We proved that innovation flourishes not in exclusive corners of privilege, but in the intersection of diverse experiences and viewpoints. Elena paused, looking up at her mother. Carmen nodded for her to continue. When I discovered I was pregnant, it wasn't fear of single motherhood that drove me away. It was the realization that our creation was being twisted into something that would perpetuate the very barriers we had worked to break down. Richard Montgomery and Victoria Hawthorne didn't just steal our credit, they deliberately eliminated the ethical safeguards and collaborative elements that made our system revolutionary. I couldn't let my child be born into a world where profit matters more than people, where voices are silenced because they don't come from the right backgrounds or have the right credentials. So I made a choice, to protect both my baby and the truth, hoping that someday both would find their way back to light. Tommy reached for the notebook, and Elena handed it to him. His young voice carried the weight of history as he read. The original algorithm, which I've preserved in code fragments hidden throughout these pages, was designed to learn from all voices, to recognize wisdom in unexpected places, and to evolve in response to human needs rather than market demands. It was meant to be a bridge, not a barrier. What Montgomery and Hawthorne never understood was that the ethical constraints weren't limitations. They were innovations in themselves. By forcing the system to consider the human impact of its decisions, we had created something truly revolutionary, artificial intelligence that could grow without losing its connection to human values. Sophia, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. Abuela, is that why you kept all those old computer parts? Were you trying to rebuild it? Maxwell took the notebook next, his voice thick with emotion as he read. To Maxwell Sterling, I never told you about our child because I believed you would be forced to choose between your company and the truth. I couldn't bear to watch you make that choice. But I want you to know that every time I saw TechVision's success announced in the news, I hoped that somehow, some part of our original vision had survived. The irony is that it did survive, not in the company's technology, but in the heart and mind of our daughter. Elena's instinctive understanding of how to bridge worlds, how to see value in overlooked places, how to fight for ethical innovation, these are the fruits of what we created together, both in the lab and in love. Elena wiped tears from her eyes as her father's voice broke on the last words. Carmen reached for her daughter's hand. There's more, she said. The most important part. Elena took the notebook back, turning to the final pages. Her eyes widened as she began to read. But I didn't just preserve the truth. I left a path to reclaim it. Hidden in these pages are not just memories, but keys. The original code, the ethical frameworks, the collaborative models. Everything needed to rebuild what was lost. Not as a relic of the past, but as a foundation for the future. Because the real revolution isn't in the technology itself, but in who gets to shape it. And now, watching my daughter open doors that were closed to her mother, seeing my grandson understand codes that I once wrote, hearing my granddaughter ask questions that challenge the status quo, I know that the time has finally come. The truth isn't just about setting the record straight. It's about showing the world that the future of innovation belongs to everyone who has the courage to imagine it differently. The kitchen fell silent as Elena finished reading. Outside, the city hummed with its usual evening rhythm, unaware that in this small apartment, a truth 3 decades in the making was finally coming to light. Maxwell was the first to speak. We need to rebuild it, all of it. Not just acknowledge the past, but actively reclaim the future you envisioned. Tommy was already pulling out his laptop. The code fragments. I think I know how to piece them together, if we combine them with modern frameworks. First, Elena said, her voice firm with purpose, we need to share this story with the world, not just as history, but as a blueprint for change. Then let's begin, she said, her voice strong and clear. It's time for the hidden genius to come out of hiding. The TechVision auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Journalists from every major tech publication filled the seats, their devices ready to broadcast what had been billed as a revolutionary announcement about the future of ethical AI. But the real preparation was happening backstage, where 3 generations of innovators worked to bring a buried dream back to life. Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor, his laptop connected to the main presentation screen, running final tests on the reconstructed algorithm. Sophia stood beside him, reading out code fragments from Carmen's notebook, while Elena and Maxwell reviewed their presentation notes. Carmen watched it all from her wheelchair, her eyes bright with pride and purpose. "The neural pathways are aligning exactly like in your notes, Abuela," Tommy said excitedly. "When we add the ethical constraints, the system doesn't just adapt, it evolves in completely new ways." James Chen burst into the room, his tablet displaying breaking news. "You need to see this." Victoria's full interview just dropped online. They gathered around the tablet to watch. "I was young, ambitious, and wrong." Victoria's voice was steady as she faced the camera. "We didn't just bury innovations. We buried a vision of technology that could have changed everything. Carmen Ramirez and her team didn't just create an algorithm. They created a blueprint for ethical innovation. And I helped destroy it because I couldn't see past profit margins and market share." Elena felt Maxwell tense beside her. On screen, Victoria continued, "The truth is, Tech Vision's success was built on stolen dreams. But what haunts me most isn't the theft, it's knowing what we lost. A chance to develop AI that grows with humanity instead of apart from it. A model for inclusive innovation that could have transformed Silicon Valley's culture. All because we couldn't accept that breakthrough ideas don't just come from corner offices and prestigious degrees." The interview cut to photographs from 1991, Carmen's team working in the lab, their faces bright with possibility. Elena recognized some of them from her research. Maria Santos, Priya Patel, James Wong, brilliant minds whose contributions had been erased. 10 minutes to showtime, a stagehand called out. Elena turned to her family. "Is everyone ready?" Tommy nodded, patting his laptop. "The original algorithm is fully restored and integrated with modern frameworks. When we launch it during the presentation, it will show everyone what ethical AI really looks like," Sophia finished, clutching the notebook that contained her grandmother's legacy. Maxwell straightened his tie, a gesture Elena had come to recognize as his way of gathering strength. "The board is completely behind us." After Victoria's confession and the public response, they understand that this isn't just about correcting the past. It's about securing our future. Elena stared at the tiny device. "You kept a complete backup. All these years." Tommy's eyes went wide. "The backup. It would have the original testing data, the development logs, everything we need to prove. To prove that the greatest breakthrough in AI history came from a team of outsiders who dared to think differently," Elena finished. She looked at her mother with new understanding. "You weren't just protecting the truth. You were preserving it for the right moment." Maxwell checked his watch. 5 minutes. "Elena, are you sure about this? Once we make this public, there's no going back. The entire tech industry will have to reevaluate decades of development." Elena stood straight, channeling the strength she'd inherited from both her parents. "That's exactly what needs to happen. Mom didn't just leave us code, she left us a mission, to show the world that true innovation comes from bringing people together, not keeping them apart." Sophia, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Like how Tommy and I helped translate Abuela's old notes into new code. Different generations, different perspectives, creating something greater than any of us could achieve alone," Carmen finished, her eyes shining. A stagehand appeared at the door. 2 minutes. As they moved toward the stage, Elena felt the weight of history and possibility converging in this moment. Behind her, Tommy carried the laptop containing the restored algorithm. Beside her, Sophia clutched Carmen's notebooks. Maxwell wheeled Carmen's chair, her presence a testament to resilience and vindication. Through the curtain, they could hear the buzz of the waiting crowd. Journalists, industry leaders, and most importantly, hundreds of Tech Vision employees from every level of the company, all gathered to witness a 3-decades-old truth finally come to light. "Ready?" Elena asked her family. The stage lights began to brighten, and the curtain started to rise. In that moment, they were more than individuals. They were the past, present, and future of innovation, united in their commitment to prove that the greatest breakthroughs happen when every voice has a chance to be heard. The spotlight illuminated Elena as she stepped up to the podium, the packed auditorium falling into expectant silence. Camera flashes sparkled like stars across the darkness, capturing this historic moment. Behind her, the massive screen displayed the Tech Vision logo, soon to be transformed by the truth they were about to reveal. 33 years ago, Elena began, her voice steady and clear, a group of young innovators gathered in this building with a dream. They weren't just trying to create artificial intelligence. They were trying to create understanding. Between humans and machines, yes, but more importantly, between different perspectives, experiences, and voices. She gestured to Carmen, who sat proudly in her wheelchair at center stage. My mother, Carmen Ramirez, led that team. Not from a corner office, but from a basement lab where maintenance workers contributed insights about real-world applications, where cafeteria staff helped shape user interfaces, where cleaning crews spotted patterns that engineers had missed. Tommy stepped forward, connecting his laptop to the presentation system. The screen came alive with lines of code, the original algorithm, restored and enhanced, but maintaining its revolutionary core. What they created wasn't just innovative, it was transformative. An AI system that didn't just process data, but understood context. That didn't just follow rules, but evolved ethically. That didn't just serve profit margins, but human needs. Maxwell joined her at the podium. For too long, Tech Vision buried this truth. We built our success on stolen dreams and silenced voices. Today, we're not just acknowledging that past, we're reclaiming its vision. The audience stirred as Tommy initiated the program. On the massive screen, the algorithm began to run, its ethical frameworks visible in elegant mathematical patterns. Sophia stood beside her brother, reading from Carmen's notebooks, comparing the original notes to the live results. Watch, Elena continued, gesturing to the display. When we integrate the ethical constraints that were stripped away, the system doesn't become less powerful. It becomes more adaptive, more intuitive, more human. The demonstration unfolded like a digital symphony. The algorithm processed complex problems, but instead of simply calculating solutions, it showed its work, revealing how it considered human impact, ethical implications, and diverse perspectives at every step. James Chen stood up from his seat in the front row. The processing speed is unprecedented, he announced, reading from his tablet. And the accuracy rates. This is beyond anything we've achieved with conventional AI. Elena unveiled their next announcement. Today, Tech Vision isn't just acknowledging its past, we're transforming our future. I'm proud to announce the establishment of the Ramirez Institute for Ethical Innovation. The screen shifted to show architectural plans for a new campus building. This won't be just another research facility. It will be a place where janitors can become engineers, where cafeteria workers can become coders, where anyone with an idea will have the resources and support to bring it to life. Maxwell stepped forward. The institute will be led by a board of directors that includes members from every level of our company, from maintenance to management. Because we've learned that breakthrough ideas don't care about job titles. Tommy took the podium next, his young voice carrying the confidence of someone who understood he was part of something historic. Using Abuela's restored code as a foundation, we've already begun developing new applications. Imagine AI that doesn't just make decisions, but explains them in ways everyone can understand. That doesn't just follow ethics guidelines, but helps us explore moral implications we might have missed. Sophia joined her brother. And imagine a tech industry where everyone has a voice, where your background doesn't determine your chances, where innovation speaks louder than credentials. The audience erupted in applause as Carmen raised her hand for silence. I've waited 33 years for this moment, not just to reclaim credit, but to revive a dream that technology should unite us, not divide us. That progress should lift all voices, not silence them. Elena felt tears in her eyes as she delivered the final announcement. Starting today, Tech Vision is releasing the original ethical frameworks as open source code. We're establishing a fund to support innovators from underrepresented communities. And we're calling on every tech company to examine their own histories, to acknowledge buried contributions, and to commit to a future where innovation belongs to everyone. The auditorium exploded with excitement. Journalists rushed to file their stories. Social media lit up with the news. But Elena's attention was on her family. Her mother, finally vindicated. Her father, learning to lead with heart as well as mind. Her children, carrying a legacy they now fully understood. Later that evening, long after the cameras had gone and the headlines had been written, the family gathered in Carmen's apartment. The same kitchen table that had held her confession now held celebration dinner. Takeout containers mixed with impromptu coding sessions as Tommy continued to explore the possibilities of his grandmother's algorithm. "You know what this means, right?" Sophia said, looking up from her homework. "Every time someone uses ethical AI, they'll be using a little piece of Abuela's dream." Maxwell raised his glass. "To the hidden geniuses, past, present, and future. And to the cleaners who became coders," Elena added, thinking of her own journey. "To the truth," Tommy said, his laptop still running Carmen's algorithm. "To family," Sophia concluded. As they celebrated, the algorithm continued to run, its ethical frameworks processing the world in ways its original creators had envisioned. Outside, the San Francisco fog rolled in, wrapping the city in silver. But inside this small apartment, the future was crystal clear. A future where every voice could be heard, where every dream could take flight, where innovation knew no boundaries.